He is scarcely more than a rumor, a legend, but for the lack of telling. His new book, Consider the Ravens, the redacted life of Colossus Electricity, chronicles his life, his loves, and his loss. Here to read from a collection of approved excerpts, Colossus Electricity.
Thank you, little man. When I say that Sally Reinhardt took my breath away, it is without hyperbole. I would regularly lose time while gazing at her perfectly plump cheeks. She used to gather wild daisies in a flower-patterned sundress near the farmhouse where she nearly grew up. Forgetting my breath, I'd end up fainting. Later, I'd find myself waking with the feeling as though my head had been cracked open like an egg. I took care to keep my eyes squinted to prevent my eyeballs from sliding out like so much yellow yolk. I'd peer up at a clear blue sky with the feeling that I was hanging from the earth, about to fall into the blinding heavens which suggested the visage of Sally whensoever I blinked. So I blinked rapidly and with some purpose. Years later, she was laid out, devoid of the joie de vivre I'd come to know. Her sweet cheeks had become sullen, drained of their full vibrancy. The same eyes that had delivered me the favor of her living image plucking daisies would now betray me with the memory of her lying lifeless in that box, the photographic negative haunting my eyelids forevermore. Chapter 7, Early Career. Dame Judi Dench's cunt is on fire, shouted Sir Michael Caine. It was 1994 and the fourth feverish night in a row of reckless experimentation with LISID. That's where you ingest LSD through your eyes. I found myself in London's underground celebrity prostitution ring of the British aristocracy. It was the 4th of April, and I was due in Seattle, Washington, to retire an undercover operative who had been posing as the frontman of a premier Seattle grunge band. The Concorde was waiting for me at Heathrow, and I could not afford gentlemanly consideration, even for a royal dame's vulva stewing in its own smegma. I turned to Sir Richard Harris, clapped my hand upon his frail shoulder, and shared a knowing look that only men of our station could comprehend. As I left the soiree, I knew I would never rid my ears of the echoing of the woeful, euphoric cries of Dame Judy's double penetration, spurred on by acid and blindness. Outside, my young protege, Brooklyn Barbie, had already warmed the car. "Party cut short, Mr. E?" she asked. "I believe that party will never realize its guest of honor has absconded," I replied. I allowed myself a lingering gaze at Barbie's bust line as I crawled into the Pontiac Fiero's passenger seat. I knew the skimpy outfit she'd donned was for my benefit, and I wanted to compliment the young lady by allowing her to believe she'd elicited the lustful leer as per her design. While I never intended to act on any sort of sexual union, I wanted Brooklyn Barbie to believe that it was a possibility. I used it as a phallic carrot to dangle before her in order to encourage the development of her skills. The truth is, I loved young Brooklyn, and on a later date in Kosovo, when she'd been riddled with bullets that had been meant for me, I gave her the deep, passionate kiss of a lover as she breathed her last into my mouth in order to give her life a satisfactory denouement. Once the light left her eyes, her limp tongue slid clear of my mouth in mournful surrender. I gently shut her eyes and whispered, "Good night, my sweet Brooklyn angel." And just as her spark fled, her bowels collapsed in an undignified release of her wet and fusty ordure. And to this day, when the wind slices through the juniper trees, I can still smell the defeat of her soiled Jordache denim, sharting the word, Brooklyn. Chapter 30:12, The Hive Mind. It was Times Square, New Year's Eve, 1999, and everyone was convinced that the Y2K bug was about to end life as we knew it. Having dabbled in some time travel with Sir Richard Branson, I knew we were safe from digital doom. So I instead focused my vigor to the task at hand, a highly choreographed and fervent orgy. I plunged into the heap of wet and writhing flesh with the sexual appetite of a Coidosaurus rex. The lines of morality and gender blurred by the lines of cocaine. An endless Ouroboros of heroin and analingus creating a Mobius strip of perennial pleasure and a closed causality loop of body heat and sodomy. As balls dropped all around us, I watched as the master of ceremonies, Dick Clark, had the first of what I expect was many strokes. Chapter 69, Deep Cover. I'd spent many months of the 21st century's first decade under deep cover as a Silicon Valley tech billionaire. My backstory was vague, but I was to have invented something called an app that would allow its users to order pizza or some such trivial nonsense. I was at a party for some of the left coast elite. I was introduced to someone that I was assured was of note. A young woman by the name of Kimberly Kardashian. We made love throughout the night, stopping only to piss and replenish our lost salts and oils. When we awoke early the next morning, the evidence of our sex flaking away like the molting skin of a diamondback, I expressed to young Kimberly that her lovemaking skills, whilst quite nearly adequate, were not enough to win my heart. The peeling leftovers of our night together would only affect the remnants drying on our bodies. The layers of my heart had shed long ago as a soured onion. The heart that remained was a mere muscle performing its pulmonary tasks involuntarily, never again to face interruption by such notions as desire or whimsy. But even as the wafting tang of Miss Kardashian's perspiring mongrel posterior hung in the air, I was again being summoned by an empty suit from the agency who had considered themselves my handler, a slight and insufferable facsimile of a human being who had mistaken me for someone who longed to be wrangled. Her Christian name is sealed for my eyes only, but I will call her field agent Stick-up-her-ass for proper reference of glossy. The mission, as so many of my adventures are, is classified at the highest level. What I can tell you is that it was an utter failure. This is why I would never again work with trained howler monkeys, or as they are more commonly known, the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, and Firearms. It was a raid on a small living dead militia in the desolate spud-laden hellscape that is God's Idaho. With respect to the closed files deep in the government's secret sphincter of clandestine super secrets and furtive files of fidelity, I can only tell you that many agents were killed in the line of what they perceived as duty, while myself and Agent Stick-up-her-ass were left charged with dispatching the zombified, reanimated corpse population of Hush Hushville, Idaho. That night, the fair Agent Stick-up-her-ass and I rejoiced in our survival by joining our sweat-glazed bodies in some of the finest coital acrobats since the Lord thy God deflowered the Virgin Mother. I was within a proverbial stone's throw of removing that stick from her ass and replacing it with the unmistakable heat of physical love, when I began to sense there was something amiss. As I began to thrust into the warm suggestion of her distended pudenda, I noticed it. A small U-shape on her forearm. One of the zombies had gotten a taste. Her eyes began to dull, and I knew I had to act fast. I tied her down to the bed and completed the love-making session, in hopes that she could meet her maker with the satisfied glow of a woman who had known a man. Then, drawing my pistol, I shot twice. Once to squelch the undead beast she had become, and once to fill the splayed thirst of her accepting alimentary canal. Epilogue, present day. These days I encounter far less death and adventure. Mostly I try to blend in and be a normal person. I Facebook. I eat Doritos. Read John Grisham. And sip Miller beer. But you realize that if you kill enough time, time begins to kill you in revenge. I think of Sally Reinhardt. I think of that time machine I confiscated from Richard Branson in 1992. And I think of impossibilities. Thank you very much.